right, let's do 2.A.5, the half-breeds. So, this idea came from a bit of inspiration from the stats themselves. So, if you look at Rolemaster 2, which is what I was playing when I started creating the world, and you look at the stats for, the humans and the elves and dwarves and everything, and then you look at the stats for half-elves. I looked at those stats, and I said to myself, why haven't the half-elves taken over the world yet? Right? Like, it's just whatever setting it is, why haven't the half-elves taken over the world yet? Because their stats were just flat out better than both the humans and the elves. They were better, statistically speaking, than both their parents. They had a better, like, if you sum up all the bonuses, they had a better sum bonus line. They had of the D6, D8, or D10 hit points, I think it was like the dwarfs and the high men and the half elves that had D10s, right? So they had they were just across the board. Best saves, best stats, among the best hit points, and still good number of background points. So it was just like, why haven't these folks just taken over the world? I mean, right. That's a question. That sounds like it's a question assuming a setting. It's not. But if you think of most general fantasy settings, sure, there are half-elves, and they're not necessarily rare, but the humans outnumber them, the elves outnumber them, the dwarves outnumber them, maybe, So my thought there was, okay, so what is it going to be about the halflings? And by the way, or not the halflings, but the half-elves, and which, by the way, when I was stopping to think about this, I was thinking about everyone else. There's no way I'm going to just do half-elves. Obviously, it's fantasy. Things don't have to work biologically, and even if it did work, like real-life biology, there's no reason why this would have to be true either. But I saw no reason why the only half-breed I would offer would be a half-elf, right? So I've got half-elves, half-dwarfs, half-halflings, which are jokingly referred to as quarterlings, and then I've got dwarf halves, which are dwarf and halfling heritage, elf halves, which are elf and halfling heritage, and dwarf elf, or dwelf, which are obviously dwarf and elf heritage. I already said that, actually. So I gave stat lines to all of them, and I kind of followed the pattern that I saw when comparing the parental line of half-elves to the half-elves themselves. I followed that same pattern, so they're all statistically better. The weaknesses of their parents are lessened, and if they both had the same strength, then it was magnified. So I said, why have these people not taken over the world? Well, okay, the answer is they're hated. They're second-class citizens. So they've never been given the power. And I thought, why are they second-class citizens, right? So I'm working backwards, actually, I was building the world top-down, but actually I was starting in this way. I was starting lower and moving my way up, going, okay, from a world creation perspective, why is that? And what I came down to, the next idea was, they're seen as second-class citizens by basically every religion because they can't breed true. A half-elf mama and a half-elf daddy cannot make a half-elf child. They either have elf children or human children, independently. Like, they could have one elf and one human child, but they would never have half-elf children. A dwelf and a quarterling get together, and their children could be equally chanced halfling, dwarf, elf, or human. And basically each of the religions have come up with their own explanation as to why that is so. And something like the main Manish religion just basically says, like, well, that's because they aren't favored by the god, because that's a monotheism religion. It's not favored by the god. That was not a favored union. And so while you get something out of the union, it won't persist. Its foundation is too weak. Its blood is too weak and too impure to continue reproducing. So that's how I gave them all better stat lines, but also kind of said, well, if they are so much physically and mentally better, why they aren't running the world? Because there aren't enough of them to run the world. On top of being disadvantaged in society also. Not every society, but in a lot of the societies. Now, the reason why that came together, that ties in a little bit to the previous video, why we didn't want like bugbears and stuff like that, ties all the way back to the cosmology, to the world creation, the universe creation even. So this is kind of out of place in this video, but and it is actually one of those secrets that I have planted. It would have to be high-level characters to get into it, but to discover the meaning of the universe, I mean, that would, yeah, you'd be high-level to do that, right? Is that there's essentially, without giving too much away, there's essentially a source, a supernatural source, not a deity, but a supernatural source for every individual physical item. Not independently, so I like a frog, for instance, might be a physical living representation or creation, I should say, not representation, but creation of the supernatural source for both a reptile and a fish, right? The source of the reptile made some reptiles. The source of the fish made lots of fish. And then the two sources got together and said, put together, what would we do? Let's make something together, and thus an amphibian. Just as an example, I didn't go through in detail every single little stupid thing. But you know, the earth has a supernatural source. The ocean, water, has a supernatural source. And all these are also tied into, as I kind of already referenced, each living being. Dwarves do tend to like the mountainous areas. They do tend to be hard-working and serious. Not exclusively, they're not caricatures of these aspects, but if every characteristic could be represented on a 1 to 10 scale, the dwarves can't score 1, the lowest on hardworking, right? They will be at least a 2 or a 3, you know. So that's kind of the way I approach it, because they have a source which makes them a particular way. There is no source for the half-breeds. When an elf and a human get together and they make a half-elf, that's a function of the biology, but not the cosmology. Because of that, there's no cosmological source to give them children. Like, essentially, like, the biology forces it past. Like, the biology is what makes it happen once, but it would take a cosmological force to make it continue, right? That's kind of the way I did that. And that's also why there aren't bugbears, because there's no cosmological source for such a thing. If the male and female bugbear were created by some wizard trying to make abominations of different sorts, and they got out in the wild and they mated, they would not make more bugbears, because there's no cosmological source, no supernatural source for the creation and sustaining of a life form known as bugbears. So the same thing applies to the half-breeds. They're better. They are better than everybody else, biologically, straight out better, but they can't make anything of it. Until my last campaign. Until that last campaign I ran. And it ended with a big thing. Some religious prophecy came true. So, anyways, that is going to be it's just about to hit 10 minutes. That's going to be my video on the half-breeds. Next, I will probably do a video just kind of talking less boringly, less statistically about 2.A. I feel like especially 2.3 and 2.4, Dwarves and Halflings, was really boring. I don't want to be like that again. I want to go past the numbers and past the hardcore stats and go ahead and tell you about something about these folks. So, see you guys later.